Hello and welcome to this edition of the Weekly Dose. This is Patrick Dare in Washington, D.C. First, I want to apologize to all that are watching me now. A little late, there were some technical issues, but that is expected. And today I want to ask for your patience because there's a lot to be said. Having missed the last week, I took some hiatus. My producer, being a student, needed some time to study for his exams and therefore we could not produce. But anyway, thank you for being here. Today I want to tackle two issues that are interrelated with what is going on in Kenya. The first one is, why do people vote the way they vote? And seemingly, they vote against their own interest. What is the psychology behind that? That has always fascinated me. And the psychology of punishment, apparently, is what plays in people's heads. It is the psychology of punishment is the key to why people vote against their own interests, says an Oxford neurologist who did a study this study has been on for the last 40 years. And the question was, why do people vote the people they vote in, and these people don't necessarily have their own interests at heart? The point of it is it's about punishment. And part of the experiment was they gave a group of people over a period of time a certain amount of money. And they say that you have to share it with somebody. And then if the person agrees to share it, then you keep the money and the person keeps whatever you share. It was found that in each time that the person given the money to share, if he gave or she gave less than 30% of that total amount, the other person would not accept it. 30%, regardless of the amount. 30% of that total amount given to the other person, the person would not accept it because they deemed that was not fair. And so, instead of now having that 30%, whatever amount it was, they would rather give it up altogether. But that was because now they are punishing the person that was given the money to share. And that's the psychology. That if I can't have what I think my share is, then you too are not going to have that share. And so we've seen here in the US, for instance, people that voted for Donald Trump, that the policies that are now coming up definitely shows that it's going to hurt the majority of those people who actually need the help. The myth is that here in the US is that the black folks are the most dependent on government subsidies. Actually, 60% of those who depend on government subsidies are the Caucasian, the white folks. But this psychology of punishment, and especially in this election, was that the white people, or the majority that voted for Trump, is that they feel that the other minorities, the immigrants, and other minorities are getting something that they shouldn't get. And therefore, whether they bring in somebody who would not necessarily bring policies that benefit them, so be it. It is punishment. And this is what we saw in Kenya, and we've seen in the Kenyan elections. The only election in Kenya that we can say that people actually voted for a government that they thought was going to do them right was in 2002 when Kibaki was elected. At that point, Kenyans had had enough of dictatorship, they'd had enough of Moi, they wanted change, and all the communities came together. There was nobody to punish. And so the Luos, everybody the Kikuyus voted for Kibaki. And at the time, Raila was with Kibaki. The groundswell was there. People wanted change. But that was short-lived. Soon after, there was a coalition of Uhuru and Ruto. And the election was stolen, we know, in 2013. And in 2017, we know what has happened. But what is behind this thing about this community voting in a president who has been very unpopular and did things that all they've done was huge corruption, misuse of public funds, and yet they will vote for Uhuru and Ruto to punish the other communities. That's the bottom line. Because in my mind, and I believe this totally, a typical Kikuyu in Kikuyu land, a typical Kalenjin in Kalenjin land, Baringo, in Elgeyo Marakwet, in Chepkorio, in Bugar, Singore, Iten, a typical Kalenjin, and a Kikuyu in Meru, in Nyeri, in Muranga, is no better off than a Luo. It's a myth. We've seen the rundown schools in these areas where president after president has come from. We don't see roads much better than in other parts of the country where Moi came from. Uhuru and Ruto have been here for the last 5 years. Kibaki was there. Kenyatta Senior was there. We don't see any much big difference. But of course, the people within the power have enriched themselves. That, for me, is this issue of the people of these two communities feel that if they can't have the presidency, they'll punish the other side. And therefore they'll vote for these people even though there's really nothing that they've brought, no value have Uhuru and Ruto brought to Kenyans in the last 5 years. So what value do we expect that they will bring in? And we see it in other areas. Right now, a governor who was accused of stealing millions when they were in charge of the National Youth Service. We've heard about the Eurobond being misused and not being accounted for. The SGR. All this corruption that the president himself admitted that it is so embedded in the government that he was almost throwing in the towel. And yet, this community will still vote them in. We've seen a big amount of wealth being amassed from the public office. Where does somebody become a billionaire in a matter of 5 years for being a vice president? With no productivity to show, no industry that employs people to show that this money is actually coming in as part of a business to employ Kenyans, yet unemployment is rampant. The promises of Tumetenga was the order of the day. Kenyans, we have to think deeper than just voting in who we think our people are. Martin Luther King, in trying to address this endemic oppression of people who are alike, the poor, the middle class, the downtrodden, he hoped to bring in the blacks, the white people within the Appalachian area, which is the area that is being seen as very impoverished, the Latinos, the Indians, the original Indian Americans. He hoped that in bringing them together as a coalition, they would form a strong base that would form what he called democratic socialism. Well, in America, that word socialism is just, you don't want to mention that in America. Now, the issue about that punishment, for the longest time, the majority of poor white have been used by the elite white, and it dates back to the slavery time. There had to be some hierarchy. The rich white had to convince the poorer white that if you let the black people come up, they'll take your position. And therefore you have to be with us because we are one of you. And that's what plays on in Kenya every day. We are your sons, and we are one of you. So it doesn't matter how corrupt we are. It doesn't matter whether we deliver to you or not. We're just one of you. We are your sons. And therefore, you vote for them. Even when that it has been shown that the voting was flawed, you vote for them. Now, I hope that NASA has read between the lines that people are tired. People are tired of being cheated over and over and over. People did not turn up when NASA called on them not to turn up to vote. And we saw the results. Recently, the celebration of Jamhuri Day, if anybody was blind to it, then they're living in another world. The stadiums were empty. The president was addressing an empty stadium. Everywhere, the cities, in Eldoret, in Kakamega, in Kisumu, in Nairobi, everywhere the stadiums or the gathering places were empty. In Machakos, the governors were talking to empty stadiums. People have been that sick. They do not want to celebrate Jamhuri again because Jamhuri means independent, but they're not independent from this cadre of people who form a coalition and they just suck the country dry. We've heard that the country is broke. They're borrowing money to pay a loan. We're not producing there's no revenue coming in. We have to borrow from Tom to pay Paul. And who is being straddled by this? Our children, generations to come, are being straddled by this burden. Because people at the top have to build $1 billion homes. They have to build their hotels on public land. They have to tear gas people and use live bullets to kill those that say, no, we've had enough. So NASA must take a stand, and it must be a hardline stand. The report says that there's some negotiation going on that's being facilitated by the international bodies. Now, the international bodies have their own interest. So for them, stability is it. You can have a mediocre democracy process, but they'll sing democracy. But when the interest comes to it, and that interest is threatened by instability, they'd rather go for a mediocre democracy or a pretense of it, because that's what it is. The swearing in, or actually the coronation of William Ruto and President and Uhuru Kenyatta, being a coronation, is exactly that. People have shown him that he does not have legitimacy. You saw that through the empty stadiums. I hope he saw that. And he saw the writing on the wall that people are tired. And that should be a cue for NASA. You must take a hard line in this negotiation. Yes, negotiate. But that negotiation must have irreducible minimum, as you said before. And that must be the change in the Constitution, the election processes, This IEBC must go home, and there has to be a way to give the people, the majority of the people, a voice. And that voice can only come through the ballot. So in my opinion, NASA must take a hard stand and negotiate for and tell the international body that what they're talking about, the bottom line, when you add up everything, the bottom line must be another election in 6 months or so, where it will be seen to be free, fair, and credible. A different process. That should be the minimum. Otherwise, then, NASA, you will have betrayed the will of the people, the will of the majority who listened to you and did not go to vote, who knew that there was a path to freedom, to a proper Jamhuri. They're waiting. And you have to deliver. Yes, negotiate. Because Kenyans are peaceful people. But we do not want complacency either. We've been told over and over when elections are told, move on. And the same process goes back, nothing happens. This is the time that NASA must come together as a coalition. They have money to do what Martin Luther King wanted to do. They have money to bring these communities together to a point where they're saying enough is enough. We are not going to bow down to only 2 communities or these illegitimate leaders. NASA must negotiate with one voice. The People's Assembly is a tool that they have, and that must be effected. The swearing in of Raila that was postponed, in my view, I think is strategic. But that must not be taken off the table. The people have shown they boycotted the elections. They were ready to die being shot by live bullet. They did not celebrate Jamhuri because there was no celebration. And the voice that they want to listen to is the voice of NASA, of a coalition, of a bigger community being part of this country. And that is my perspective. What's yours? This is Patrick Dare in Washington, D.C. And thanks for watching. Please share this, comment, and any comment is welcome. Thank you.